My name is Ronnie Hicks. I'm a consultant from Oakwood Systems Group. Here today to talk about database projects in Visual Studio, more specifically 2012. I know 2010 had database projects. 2012 introduced SQL Server data tools and kind of a whole new paradigm for database projects. So we'll just go ahead and jump into it here. Make sure I not go to launcher. So just a brief overview of what I'm going to cover here today. We're going to talk a little bit about database ALM, intro to database projects. I'm going to do a real quick short demo.
What is ALM?
Application Lifecycle Management. We're going to talk not real deep in depth about SQL Server data tools, but go over some of the features available through SQL Server data tools.
Right in my post.
Talk slow. Okay.
Really great. Keep it up.
Going to talk a little bit about the DAC framework. I don't know why it's called DAC. It's Data Tier Application. I don't understand where that acronym came from, but there it is. And then we're going to talk about the Data Tier Application Package, or DAC. That's actually a very powerful feature of SQL Server data tools. It's used behind the scenes in a lot of features. So, first, database ALM in the current environment without database projects it's a pain. It's really hard to accomplish in the correct way. Several of those features pain points are refactoring. So in the normal SQL development, if you wanted to change the name of a column or name of a variable or whatever, you have to have an intimate knowledge of the data structure as well as anything that touches it to know that it's not going to affect something that you don't want it to do. Simple errors like incorrect spelling of an object, for example, going back to the refactoring, are caught way too late in the development cycle for my taste. We'll back up here.
Mute.
Sure. Thank you. So, where was I? Okay. Database promotion across environments is also another huge pain point. If you're doing a fresh deployment, it's not too bad. You just you script out your database, you deploy. It's pretty simple. But if you have a database already in place that you want to upgrade and not lose data, it's a pain. Pretty much your best option is to use SQL scripts that you have to either manually create or auto-generate and then review very intensively before you can actually push through without worrying about data loss. Kind of in the same vein, applications have versions and databases don't. It's simple as that. So let's have a scenario where something happens and you need to roll back 3 versions in your application. Well, your database has changed pretty dramatically since that. Can you easily just roll back to your database 3 versions ago and make sure the application still works flawlessly? Probably not. And that's where database projects and SQL Server data tools come to the rescue. So let this, there we go. These are just some of the features available through SQL Server data tools and database project. Most of them are SQL Server data tool specific features, such as the buffer declarative editing. And basically what that is a feature whether you're connected to a live database or even a offline model representation. It allows you as a developer to focus on the what, not the how. So if you want to change, excuse me. If you want to change the name of a column, you just do it. And then the tooling focuses on how to accomplish that, what to generate, what features to push, whatever it has to do. Kind of hand in hand, as I mentioned, the model-based design. The model is a representation of the database that can be validated against using static code analysis. So for those of you familiar with C# or VB, they offered, I believe starting in probably 2008, maybe 2010, static code analysis for your code to ensure coding standards are met and overall that somebody doesn't come in and destroy your code and get away with it. Also, as a benefit of it being a model-based design, you can compile the database structure to determine correctness. And I'll be showing some of that later on. Another feature that SQL Server Data Tool offers is the local testing and promotion. So, who here has heard of the local DB runtime? Okay. It's very, very powerful. If you're doing any database development at all, I suggest you get local DB. It is very, very nice.
What is it?
It is a serviceless runtime. You can create several instances using their command line utilities, and it doesn't support all the features of SQL Express or full-blown SQL. I want to say full text is not supported in local DB. But other than that, it runs when you need it, not as a service behind the scenes that runs all the time.
So it's a database for development purposes?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But it's not as powerful as Express, but
it's
just different.
I think Express with advanced features gives you full text and some other options that are not supported in local DB. But local DB, as far as I'm aware, you cannot get full text support in any way. But you can with Express using advanced features. So it's a little bit less powerful than SQL Express. So source control. Our applications are in source control. You can view history, compare between change sets, all that fun stuff you can do with TFS or Git or whatever your source control provider is. Well, now with SQL Server Data Tools and database projects, you can do the same thing with database schema. Another really useful feature that I haven't seen used too often, but I really think it should be used more often, is a SQL unit test. I'm going to talk about that more later on. Galen. Database projects.
I'll help you.
So database projects, obviously they contain a lot of scripts. The scripts that represent your schema, your store procedures, your what have you. Another script that they support is what's known as a pre- and post-deploy scripts. So as part of the deployment or publishing process is that it will compile your schema into one ginormous script and push it out for you. So with these pre- and post-deployment scripts, you can generate your pre-scripts to, I don't know, disable a SQL job, disable a database trigger, what have you, and it gets compiled and prepended to your automatically generated script at the end before it actually runs. So the post-deployment script is the same way, just on the other side it's appended. So I really like to use these for lookup tables that represent any writers on my application. I hate it when I'm looking for an ID and they don't match the database. So it's a really good example of that. Thanks to SQL Server Data Tools, you can now create a snapshot of a model, the schema. Again, that uses the DAC pack, so DAC framework comes into play there. If you want to, you could take a snapshot of the model and then store it alongside your actual model, your schema, to use for version history. And that way you can just quickly go back to it and say, oh, there's my snapshot from 3 versions ago. Let me just pull that instead of rolling back, compiling, however else you would do that. So kind of hand in hand with the buffered declarative editing is this new feature called drift detection. It's definitely a SQL Server Data Tools feature, but basically what this does is, let's say you're connected to a live database, you're making some changes, and you get distracted for, I don't know, 10, 20, 15 minutes, whatever. You come back and go, oh yeah, I'm going to commit that now. Well, you hit commit, and something's changed in the database. Maybe DBA has changed the store procedure, whatever, something that was affected by your change. This drift detection will tell you, nope, something's changed. You can't do that until you re-verify that this is what you actually want to do. That also is being used through the schema comparisons that's available through SQL Server data tools. So if you're comparing schemas, you get distracted again, you come back later on, and you want to go, okay, I want to update the schema now. It won't let you do that until you fix the drift detection by recomparing and revalidating that you're doing exactly what you want to do. Not a whole bunch, but I can answer any questions you guys have after the presentation. Another comparison that SQL Server Data Tools allows is a data comparison. For those of you who have done data comparisons with third-party utilities like Radiate's SQL Data Compare, stick with SQL Data Compare. It's way better than the built-in data compare in Visual Studio, but it's nice if you don't have an option. So what is a database project? Database project is an offline model representation of a database that any number of developers can pull down and start playing in their own sandbox. You don't have to worry about, oh, Galen changed my column name. Now I have to fix my scripts. So as I mentioned, it's an offline model. The new standard for, the new development approach for databases is what's known as a project-based development. The standard, the one that we use every day, is called connected, which basically means you're connected to a live database, you're doing changes to a live development production database, what have you. Well, with it being a project-based development, you can make all these changes against the model of the database and compile and verify and validate and do everything you want to do before you actually push against to the production environment or developer environment or what have you. So, for example, a DBA can create a development environment, development database rather, from an existing production database, and then the development team, who has no access or no concept of what the database actually, what server the database represents, you can open this database project and just start working in it. Using local DB, can do local testing without ever connecting to an actual production or even the development environment that the DBA set up. As I mentioned, you get developer isolation because it is an offline project-based development. Rich T-SQL support is just amazing in database projects. So, for example, IntelliSense, SQL Server Management Studio, it tries, it sucks. It sucks. Yeah. But you also get features like go-to definition and find all references inside your schema. So if you want to know where that table is being used at, you right-click, find all references, and then it'll tell you it's being used in this sort procedure, in this view, and this and that. So very, very nice. And it's all built into a database project, so you don't have to have a third-party utility to do any of that. It's just there. Yeah, it's just like if you were using find all references in C# or DB. Very nice. Obviously, the bigger the database, the longer it takes, but...
It's a tool that's plugged into Visual Studio?
No, it's built into the database projects. Okay. All that rich feature support you get through C#, find all references, go-to definition, what have you, it's all built into the database model now.
So there's how do you get to it?
Right-click context menus. So I mentioned before that there's a lot of automated script generation through a database project. I also mentioned the pre- and post-deploy scripts. What I didn't really talk about is the refactor log. And basically what this is since you get that rich T-SQL support and you can rename a column just by right-clicking and saying rename, whether it's in the script or in the table designer, however you want to do it, you can refactor using the context menu of Visual Studio now. Well, to make sure that the database project references the object correctly, it uses this refactor log. So if you were going to a database project and just rename a column in the script and not use the refactor menu, it tries to update the refactor log appropriately. So telling you that this column used to be this, now it's that. Or really a better example would be if you want to change the name of the table. So if you wanted to change the name of a table, the normal script generation would say, oh, that's an old table, I'm going to drop it, and I'm going to create this new table. Way dangerous if you have data. Just not worth the risk. So with refactor, you can do that, and then the refactor log will tell the automated script generation that this table used to be this, now it's this. Don't drop and recreate, just do a rename. So it's very nice. As I mentioned before, you get verification and validation against the model. So as I'll show later on, whether you're using the table or script designer, you get on-the-fly validation. So it's very nice. And as I mentioned before, coding standards enforcement. Database projects now support the static code analysis. Unfortunately, in 2012, they removed the ability to customize, and I shouldn't say that, to add your own, analysis settings. You can customize the existing ones, which are all Microsoft-based, but you can't add your own like you can in Visual C# or VB. So now,
if one developer makes a change to a table name, how does that get to the other developers?
In the database project, using the source control provider, whether it's Git or TFS. So now I'm going to jump out into Visual Studio real quick and show you just how simply it is to create a database project. So, kind of cheated here a little bit because it took way too long. Can you guys see that okay? Alright. That's not true. I'm one of maybe 3 people that use the dark theme. Yeah, that's about it. Alright, so we're just going to say create a new project. Our unit test project. We want a database project. Let's call it word entry. So nothing. Let's go ahead and create a new table. Go ahead and call this one customer. And as you can see here, sort of, kind of, things kind of in the way. Here's the table designer that we're all kind of used to in Management Studio, and here's the script designer. So first thing I want to do is let's change this to customer ID, and we'll make this an identity. By the way, this is not the IntelliSense support that's built into Visual Studio. This is SQL prompt. So sorry, but I'm a little spoiled with that. Okay, so let's do customer name, varchar max, no. And as you can see, as I'm making changes in the table designer, it's reflected in the script designer and vice versa. So we'll go ahead and save that. Thank you. And go ahead and add another table. Go ahead and call this one orders. Again, same thing. I'm going to call it order ID. And I also want to look at the properties of this item, and I'll set it over here to an identity column. Then let's add customer ID. And product ID. Quantity. Very, very easy, and I'll actually be showing that in my next demo. So, in this particular example, we want a foreign key, and we want to go to the customers table. I haven't found a real intuitive way from this little designer area up here to do foreign keys and triggers and the like. I guess you could technically do it from here. I prefer to do it in script. It's just that much simpler. Customer ID to customer customers customer ID. So we have a foreign key there. Now let's say that we also want a foreign key on the product ID table. References, product ID. Obviously, this table doesn't exist. This reference doesn't exist.
Can you like
So,
zoom and the whole thing a little bit here?
sure. Oop. Let me do this. Oh, zoom. Where'd it go? There we go. So, as you can see here, we get the red squigglies. It tells me that this table doesn't actually exist. So I don't know what you're talking about. You also get the same kind of thing in the error list. As you can see there, this doesn't exist. I don't know what you're talking about.
So there's
that on the fly verification that I was talking about.
So we know
that's an issue. Let's go ahead and correct that issue. We'll go ahead and create a new table. Product ID. Product name. And that's it. So as you saw before, we had an error.
No
Error now.
On fly verification, it knows what I'm talking about.
now.
Verify that here, and notice no red squiggle.
No red squiggly.
There's exactly
That's
what I
exactly what I
was
was
talking
talking about.
You drive the local TV or you?
This is all. I haven't touched any database engine at all yet. This is all
database project right now. Right. Local DB. Yeah. So, I mean, it's that simple. So if you have a database structure you want to start working on, you can just open up Visual Studio, a new project, start going at it. It's kind of like the design first approach of Entity Framework. You just do what you want to do, and then. Well, this isn't. Any framework doesn't look at the database project. Any framework looks at databases. So once you're done with this, let's say you would publish it to a database, and then any framework would look at that database. Say what was that?
Look at the code first, or whatever it is where you build all your code and then generate a framework.
Yeah, there's a couple different approaches for any framework. There's code first, where you write all the models with the data attributes, and then there's design first, which is kind of what this is, where you design the structure using their model designer, and then you push that to the database. Excuse me.
You're designing the database.
Yes.
And then you don't use Visual Studio or anything.
Not at all.
You're going to design it like.
Yep.
Does this have a pictorial design that you
There's not one kind of built in. Well, I'm not going to get into it a lot here, but there's a lot of different things that you can do. There's a lot of different scripts that you can create. So just kind of show. Pretty much everything that's allowed in a database scripts. So.
there we had to use some actual like we use on Toast or pre-built script. A lot of times you'll have SQL commands in there, especially when you change one script after another. That will actually cause a problem if you go back into like your test runners and stuff. And you'll end up having to essentially have your unit tests fire off SQL commands. So if you ever find yourself doing that, it actually runs a hidden window behind the scene. So anything that you have in here that actually requires actual SQL commands, be careful if you're going to try to automate this all this on the server. It is running a hidden window. You could run into security restrictions and other stuff, but it can do it. That's the only limitation I've ever seen.
Okay. And so we're going to jump back over here to the slideshow real quick. Kind of get into the technical aspects of SQL Server data tools. So again, these are some of the features of SQL Server data tools. These are not all of them. There's a lot of stuff out there for SQL Server data tools, a lot of videos on Pluralsight and the like for the features available through SQL Server data tools. One of the features that SSDT offered in 2012 that I really like is the SQL Server Object Explorer. It's basically a mini management studio inside of Visual Studio. So you don't have to have that anymore as an application developer unless you want to do advanced management features. You really don't even really need it then. It's just, some people prefer it. I always jump into Management Studio even though I like the Object Explorer. It just takes time getting used to. I mentioned the static code analysis before. Oh, my mouse here. So we saw the table designer. It's the same old table designer that's in Management Studio. But again, it's with enhancements. As we saw, there was the multi-directional synchronization between the script design and the properties used. So you change it one place and it's synchronized between all three. With excuse me, with SSDT, you can now publish to a database directly from Visual Studio, or SQL Editor if you want to do that. You can also register as a data tier application. Sorry, excuse me. Which is Microsoft's attempt at making a database register as an application rather than just a resource used by a application. The flip side of all of this, these database publishing is also present in Management Studio as far as any manipulation of DAC packs or exporting, importing, upgrading, deploying. And I'll show some of that later on. We talked about the language services, the rich T-SQL support. We talked about unit testing a little bit. I'm going to go into kind of a very basic example in the next demo. So I won't talk about that much to now. One thing I want to talk about on here that I'm not going to cover at all in any demo because it's just too complicated and I just felt like covering it. SQL CLR. So I'm very impressed with how SQL CLR is handled in the database projects now. So normally, you would have to create your C# code, compile it into an assembly, register that, upload it, all this other fun stuff. Well, now that database projects are in Visual Studio, you can just create a C# script file inside the database project, just right there. And as long as you create the correct script type, when you do the compile, publish, deployment, what have you, it will handle compiling that assembly, uploading it, and registering it for you. It won't handle permissions. That's obviously something you have to manage on your own. But it just works. It just does it for you. You don't have to worry about any of it.
Well, what's a good example of where you want to use CLR?
That's hard to say. I've seen one example of it where, and I think the only reason why it was used in CLR is because it's more performant to do it this way. But really heavy string regex parsing. Let the .NET engine worry about that rather than the database.
Well, the database very much is only for
Right.
Using cloud-based application a lot better cloud-based.
Yeah.
So, are you going to talk about the part where you can Is it version control? Are you gonna get that? I mean, are we getting there, or is it one thing?
Yeah.
I'm not asking to be stupid, I'm asking to have a question about it. Wait.
I'm going to show some of the DAC properties, which is basically version and description later on. I'm not going to go too in depth with the DAC properties and versioning, but we can talk about that after the presentation. if you want.
I'm struggling a little bit is the split between the database design in SSDT, and then when the database actually gets built, and not everybody is SSDT literate. If somebody goes in and changes the table, and they need that change, the change is supposed to be real, can I get it, can I reverse it back in?
You can use schema compare to reverse it back in if you want to do it that way. Yeah.
So I'm not hanging out there, the only guy doing this, trying to convince everybody else to join.
Right. Obviously, somebody has to do that or to get into the database project. They won't just pick it up and just start going with it because it's not aware of any database.
Yeah, but just throw an error or something. So there's how obvious is it when someone's done it? Is it obvious? Or
well, let's say, right. As part of the publish deploy, if you're upgrading to an existing one, it will give you kind of a, what do they call it, a publish preview, which is basically a Word text document that says, I'm going to do this, 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 and that. So you can review it before you would overwrite some changes. But to get the changes actually in the database project, you have to do either a schema compare or go directly into the database project and modify it. So, I talked about local DB. All I want to say is get it. It's awesome. I also talked about the schema data comparison and the buffer declarative editing. The only other thing I want to talk about on here is the SQL debugging. So, personally, I've never been able to set up a successful debugging experience in Management Studio. It's a pain. I could never do it. With with database projects and SSDT, it uses the debugging engine in Visual Studio, so you get the autos, windows, locals, the watches, the call stack, the whole shebang. It's awesome. I'm going to show a little bit of that later on. You can, but I think the setup is a little bit more intense. I think you still have to go through the same setup that you would if you were doing it for Management Studio. Luckily, in all my examples, I'm going to be using AdventureWorks, excuse me, where I'm guessing all of the stuff was already set up. So I didn't have to do any of it, it just worked. And it might be because I'm working on local DB too. There's really no permissions involved with that point. So, the DAC framework. Again, I don't know why it's called the DAC framework. It's Data Tier Application Package Framework or Data Tier Application Framework. It was introduced in SQL Server 2008 R2. It's a suite of tools, APIs, and services that allow you to do imports, exports, upgrades, deploys, pretty much anything you can think that you want to do as far as schemas are concerned, as well as what's known as a backpack, which is that next bullet point there. So a DAC pack is it's an XML, just a standard XML document that stores all your schema representation in XML. A backpack is the same thing, but with data on top of it. All your data is serialized into JSON and stored inside this backpack file. Backpacks are more used for kind of like a alternative to a backup restore functionality. You create a backpack from existing database, bring it over, and it just publishes to a new instance.
What is the performance?
If you're doing this processing while in a production live environment, day-to-day activity, I would say it would probably affect it. I'm not 100% sure how badly it would affect it, but it would definitely affect it. The DAC pack probably not so much. It's more like a snapshot in time. It's just schema. So. Also with the DAC framework, which, by the way, the DAC framework is kind of included in the SQL Server data tools. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong about that. You get access to the DAC API, which is this Microsoft SQL Server.DAC I have here. So all the DAC processing that happens through the framework, you can now do using the API, whether it's processing DAC packs, importing, exporting, upgrading, what have you, generating backpacks, managing the actual data tier applications across multiple platforms. And there's also a lot of scripts and reports that you can generate using the API, which is kind of all built into the wizard as you go through the steps. So it's pretty nice. This next slide is really, really hard to read, and it's mainly, I'm not really going to talk about much here. It's mainly here for informational purposes. This is the DAC framework and how it interacts with all the different components. So in the bottom left here, that's where we have Visual Studio and SQL Server Data Tools. No way. The bottom right, we have Management Studio, and up top we have SQL Azure. So basically, all this diagram represents is with DAC framework and SQL Server Data Tools, you can do pretty much anything you want between the 3 different instances. There's very little limitations of what you can do. And I want to talk a little bit more about the DAC pack itself, because it's a pretty important piece of functionality thanks to the DAC framework and SQL Server Data Tools. As I mentioned earlier, it's using standard XML formatting. I was actually under the assumption when I first started looking into this that it would be using Microsoft's Open XML format. I was wrong. It's just using standard. It's kind of surprising. So if you're ever interested to see what a DAC pack looks like, when you install the DAC framework, you get a executable installed in your local machine somewhere in the program files jungle called DAC unpack. That allows you to unpack the DAC pack, and it basically puts it out into a big folder structure. All the XML, all the JSON, I guess, if you have backpack. As I mentioned before, DAC packs contain schema only. The DAC pack, although the DAC framework wasn't introduced until 2008 R2, the DAC pack supports SQL Server 2005 and above and SQL Azure. DAC packs are pretty integral in continuous deployment scenarios, or in at least one way of doing that. So as part of a deployment workflow, you could set up a step that will generate your DAC pack or pull it from a drops folder or what have you, and execute or automatically upgrade or publish that DAC pack for you to a target database as part of your continuous deployment. So it just all works, essentially. I wouldn't say just turn on and go with it, because data loss and all that, fun stuff. Make sure you verify that it does what you expect it to do instead of just letting it free fall. As I mentioned to Galen earlier, there are some DAC properties that are stored in SQL now. At this time, it's really just the version number, which is a string, and then the description of the DAC, or the data tier application, which again is just a string. So now I'm going to get into the big database of the night, which again, as I mentioned earlier, uses AdventureWorks. So you should, anybody should be able to pick up any of the AdventureWorks stuff and kind of goes on way with this. I did have to make some modifications. Let's go ahead and do this. Alright. Let's close the solution. So, as somebody mentioned earlier, how easy is this to just pull from an existing database and get into database project? This is the SQL Server Object Explorer that I was talking about earlier, the mini Management Studio. It's really this simple. I have a database here. Now, zoom in here. Right click, create new project. That's really it. You name your project, and we'll get all this AdventureWorks. The SQL Server Object Explorer, yeah. There's some options you can do here, add some control, all that fun stuff, and we'll start it. And it's that simple. This will go through the process of importing your database schema into a database project for you. That's all you have to do.
Past, this is Keycode, when we had external references to inside one database on the stored procedure that'll pull data from a different database.
same server on different servers. It's a, I don't know anything about this, other database than the other database. Scope procedures. Is that improved at all?
Well, as far as the importing is concerned,
pretty
wrong. I don't think it
I could be
cares about
wrong,
any of that.
but I don't think it cares about any of that. It's
Right. So on
Right.
compile, you're still going to get that.
so
that
on
error
compile, you're
unless
still going to
you,
get that error
create
unless
the
you
correct script to add the link
create
server, for
the
example.
correct script to add
As
the
long
link
as the
server, for
database
example.
project is aware
As long as the
of it,
database
which you can
project
do
is
by doing
aware of
that.
it, which you can do by doing that, will compile or throw an error when it tries to compile.
So you can get around that.
Yeah, if you generate the correct scripts, you can also use the schema compare to pull in database properties. So if you want something very specific, you can use the schema compare to pull those
server level
more
objects in, rather
server
than just
level
database.
objects in rather than just a database.
You have one database for anything, sure. There's another way to look. If you also own that other database, you can script that out as a project and have the two reference each other. Or if you don't care, you can script the other database out as a backpack, and then it'll reference that.
Problem where we had dependency upon dependency, so it was just a really deep tree. Yeah.
And on both sides too, like even in the multiple projects.
So the schemas on these foreign databases change it to update that back all the time.
Only if you absolutely have. But that should only happen if they break your stored file because they changed their scheme, it's no longer good.
Right.
Then you have to update your background.
But as long as they continue to don't have to store it.
Right, because you don't really care about that. You have deployment down that. You're just trying to get past that problem. Yeah, and
Worst thing was that people get everything, go down that. There's just something that
one of the architecture tools, when you actually set up, will throw that to the vendor flag and circular dependency.
Yeah.
Much like if you try to have two libraries reference each other, the database should reference only one direction, otherwise you're crossing the spectrum. So it will warn you about that. One of the tools is we found to like all our databases are talking to each other.
Yeah. So was this example for you?
Yes, it actually was. We only had to deal with 4 databases total, and in one of those, the guy who worked on it actually did. We had to put a backpack on both sides. One of the other, because one of the databases of the 4, we didn't want to own the code for it.
Yeah.
Okay, Ron.
So that's just one way you can do it. If you don't use the SQL Server Object Explorer for whatever reason, you can do it through another context menu. You can just go ahead and create a new project, database, whatever. And from the database project, you can say import from a backpack, from a database, or from storage. So just want to call that out, but that's not generally an option to import an existing database.
You can import from a backpack?
Backpack.
Can you import from a backpack?
No, backpack.
You can use just the schema of the backpack.
No. I don't know why. It does seem kind of silly.
Say, hey, I just want the schema portion, pull it in. So I'm going to cheat a little bit here. This is the AdventureWorks database that I pulled in from my local DB instance, but it's actually the full-scale AdventureWorks with all the full-text stuff already supported. So if I try to compile this, it will complain that full-text is not supported, or sorry, not compile, build. So when you hit F5 in a database project, that's when it actually deploys to local DB.
So you can build
without deploying it.
When you hit F5,
but when you hit F5, that's when it actually
deploys the whole thing.
deploys the whole thing. So
See,
it failed.
If we go
To error list, something about full text catalogs and not supported. I don't know why it let me import it in if it's not supported, but it did. So, okay. So I cheated a little bit, and I took that and narrowed it down, removed all the full text references. That way I didn't have to spend time doing that in the demonstration. So let's just pretend that this is the database project I just imported. Here it is on the slide. There you go. So now that we have a database project in TFS and potentially under source control, let's say that we have to make a change to a particular function. So let's a little bit. And this is going to be a really simple one. I can't really think of a complicated one. Let's just say we want to add a new status to this user-defined function. Really simple. So we'll go ahead and do that. Let's hit F5, deploy those changes to local DB. Sometimes it takes a little minute. So while we're waiting on this, local DB, when you install it, it comes with a instance called, and it's kind of weird, v11.0. That's the instance name. That's how you have to use it to connect to local DB. When you start working with database projects, they create a new instance behind the scenes for you called projects. So you can see here local DB projects. Using the API, you can also create other ones. So you notice I have a demos project or a demos instance there. I created that using the API. But the one really nice thing about working with database projects, when you're in any solution that has any database projects whatsoever, when you it generates a little project hierarchy here. And these are the database projects that I have in this solution. Now, whether this has been deployed to local DB or not, it's still going to have this representation of the database. So what I want to do is let's go ahead and set a breakpoint here, and I'm going to open up a new query window. Okay. And to make sure that I get the correct database that I'm referencing, I'm going to point to the project instance that they created for me. I want adventureworks.database, and let's just do this. Select star, dbo.ufn, get document status text 4. So I'm kind of a creature of habit when it comes to debugging. I always hit F5 and expect it to start debugging. And the query window, that's not the case. The default is to execute, just flat out execute. If you want the debugger, you have to either use Alt F5 or execute with debugger. So here we are, we're at a breakpoint here, and this is kind of misleading. What is this? You notice here it says that it's not connected because it just can't connect to the database instance for whatever reason. It hits it. I don't know why it does that in the beginning, but obviously it works. I'm not going to play. So, as I mentioned, we get call stack. So if this is a very long, complicated stored procedure chain, you can now get the call stack and find out exactly where you're at in your breakpoint. You also get, the autos window, locals window, so you can see here that I have my 2 parameters, status and return. There's my values, and as I mentioned, you get the watch window, so if you have a particular watch value you want to consider, you can do that here. We'll let this run through and see that over here it returned what we expected. So now, what I want to jump into is SQL unit test, which I know everybody's all excited about.
We want to give you a break so you can eat.
That's all right. All right. Go ahead and get started back on the scan. Oh, thank you.
Yay. It's crazy. I don't think you can make us work, you just try, but I think you can do it.
All right, so SQL unit test. Database projects give you the option to add SQL unit test to your just really your test project. So go ahead and do that. Create a new project. What am I for? C# test unit test project. We'll go ahead and call it Adventure Works Test. I'm going to delete this default one because we don't need that anyway. And then here, add a new item, and we want a SQL Server unit test. So obviously we just made the change to that user-defined function. So now we want to write a unit test to ensure that if something changes in the future, it doesn't get broken. So go ahead and do this. Here are the different properties for the unit test. So in this particular instance, I want to connect to the Projects Adventure Works database, and you can use a secondary data connection to validate your unit test. A good example of this would probably be if you want to validate that a user with less permission had access to whatever you're testing to do the validation. Probably a good example of doing that. And then you can also set it up to where it automatically deploys the database project before you run your unit test. That way you're never a schema or whatever behind. We're just going to go ahead and say OK. So if you're used to writing unit tests in C# or VB, obviously you write code. With the database unit test, they give you this GUI designer where you can write as many different tests as you want. Kind of the default is the SQL test one, what have you. So I'm going to do rename it because I'm a stickler for naming. Test rejected, and obviously click here to create the script that's necessary. This particular instance, all I want to do is select DBO. DBO.ufn get document.
Why isn't it giving you any suggestions?
I think it's because SQL prompt isn't aware of the context in this because it's not actually connected to a live database. At least not at this portion of it.
Can you have the other prompts disabled, the SQL prompt?
No, but I think SQL prompt kind of hides it behind the scenes. That's something I can definitely look into because I don't remember it actually showing up before I had SQL prompt up here either. And it might just be because of how it's set up. So kind of the default when you create a SQL unit test is to give you this assert inconclusive route. So that's obviously not what we want to do. We want to delete this one, and we want to make sure that we get the exact scalar value that we're looking for. So we'll add that. And again, going back into the intuitiveness of this GUI, this is not very intuitive at all. So you create this test condition here, then you have to do the properties over here on the right side to tell it that you're not expecting null and you want rejected. Why they couldn't put that as a double-click menu, something more intuitive, I don't know, but that's just how it is. So we're going to tell it that we're expecting rejected, and if we want to, we can name it, but I'm not too concerned about naming the test condition. So let's go ahead and go to Test Explorer, and we'll run all tests. It's going to do its build, then run the test, and we should see that it succeeded. So this is just one way of doing the unit testing, to generate the unit test, kind of a more manual process. I definitely recommend, instead of doing it that way, that you come over here to, I believe, the projects. Yep. So here we have our programmability function, scalar, and you can simply right-click here and say create unit test. Much easier, and then gives you this nice wizard so you can click all the different store procedures and use my function that you want. Let's go ahead and name this UFN get document. That is text easy. And it kind of did all the boilerplate work for me. So we want to give it 4. Obviously did the assert inconclusive again, so let's remove that. And let's add scalar value again. Get back to properties. Expecting rejected. And run all tests. And pass. very nice. Again, it's not very intuitive with the GUI design with setting the test conditions, but it does work. It is viable. So better than nothing for sure. So before we move on, I want to kind of go through the different script options you have here in the database unit test. So let me zoom in. As we can see here, that's the name of my unit test. And we have this common scripts area. So common scripts is where you can do your test initialization and test cleanup. This is so if you have multiple unit tests inside this one unit test file, this test initialize will occur before every individual instance runs. Test cleanup is the other side. It runs after every individual instance. So if you have some common setup, that you need to do, if you want to do particular setup for a given unit test, you can do pre-test and same thing as test initialize, test cleanup, just on an individual basis rather than all the unit test inside the project or unit test file rather. So go ahead and jump into. Since we're talking about unit testing and standardizations and whatnot, let's go ahead and jump into the properties of the database project and show the code analysis here. As you can see here are the kind of the baked-in rules that Microsoft gave you, avoid select star, kind of DBA common sense type rules. Once you get into it, you know what you're doing. And just like C# and DB, you can enable code analysis on build, and even go as far as making sure that continuous integration is set up on the gated check-in, so this doesn't pass and it doesn't get checked into the trunk. So the other thing, since I'm in the properties, I want to show here. I mentioned this to Kendra a little bit earlier. So since SQL Server Data Tools and the DAX framework is supported across so many different platforms of SQL Server, they give you the option of choosing your target platform, whether it be 2005, 2008, 2012, or SQL Azure. So this AdventureWorks is targeted towards 2012, as I mentioned earlier. So let's say, for example, I wanted to target this to SQL Azure, and I want to go ahead and publish this. So the really nice thing that SQL Server Data Tools does, as I showed you earlier, the on-the-fly validation. When you change the target, you get on-the-fly validation of what the target supports. So SQL Azure doesn't support a lot of things that full SQL does. And as you can see, 201 errors, these are not supported in SQL Azure, so that's just not a viable option. You can't do it. So again, I cheated a little bit. I'm going to go back to SQL Server 2012, and they actually have AdventureWorks specifically tailored towards Azure, and I've imported that here. You can see the target SQL Azure database, and we'll go ahead and build it to make sure there's no errors.
What, do you have some examples of those errors? What kind of things did Azure do?
So SQL Azure doesn't support extended properties, apparently. It also requires you to have a clustered index on every table. Let's see what else. I want to say it doesn't support full text. I don't believe it supports file storage or file tables. There's just a lot of stuff that I'm kind of surprised SQL Azure doesn't support. It doesn't support the use statement. So if you want to change context in the middle of a query, you can't do that in SQL Azure, which is kind of surprising, but you can't. So, and then kind of going into Galen's point, let's say that we want to publish this to Azure. So there's different routes that you can do that. You can do a schema compare. So, and that's as simple as right-clicking and saying schema compare on the database project. It creates a schema comparison with the source as the database project and the target. You can specify on your own, so I already have something set up. Let's go ahead and do this. If the firewall rule allows me to, which it should. Well, when this loads, I'll show a very brief glimpse of the schema comparison utility and kind of the different options that you can do when it comes to. So it might be a firewall rule. So instead, let's just point to my local database. Demos, adventure works, okay, and do a compare. There's a couple different options you can do as far as the schema comparisons are concerned. By default, I don't believe it compares the database level objects, just the server, the server level objects, just the database objects, the different properties and whatnot. And you can see here that based on the stuff that I removed that local DB doesn't support, it wants to looks like it wants to delete the error log in table. Wants to delete some triggers and some other stuff, and just kind of gives you a glimpse of what it wants to do, what all it wants to do. And if you're interested to see the differences in the script, you can click on these different objects, and it gives you the more fine-tuned schema comparison that you're used to in like Visual C# if you're doing a deep history on TFS, merging conflicts and what have you. So. That's one option to do that, and you can just hit update, and then it'll apply your changes to your database. There is an option to by default prevent data loss. So if you want to ensure that your stuff happens regardless of potential data loss, you have to enable that option. But it is disabled by default. So the other option is you can create a snapshot, which I mentioned earlier. There it is, snapshot project. Kind of gives you this baked-in snapshot name with the database and date, timestamp, and all that fun stuff, and it creates a DAC pack. So, as I mentioned, all the DAC pack functionality is supported in Management Studio as well. So let's bring it over here, and let's just say that I want to upgrade this database. So I can say CAS upgrade data tier application. This option is available whether the database is registered as a data tier application or not. The one benefit you do get, though, if it is registered as a data tier application, is you get that drift detection. Without it being registered, it can't do the drift detection, so it's just kind of a shoot and hope you don't mess something up. So we'll go ahead and browse to the snapshot file. Projects. Oh, that's right, I moved it. Sorry. Hold on. Snapshots. And next, takes a minute to detect the changes. It's not registered as a data tier application already, so it can't tell you if it can be detected or not. You can choose to roll back on failure. Okay. And as you go through this, I'm not actually going to commit this, but I just want to show that it does give you an upgrade plan. So it will tell you what it's going to do, kind of in a very summarized approach.